Good morning. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Welcome back to our conversation series with our mayoral candidates. June 22nd, say it again, it's 117 days away. Primary day, I think sooner than all of us maybe expect, or at least is starting to kind of loom in people's minds, is really happening. We're proud to be able to listen to the candidates at Avenue to kind of really understand their plans for the future. Melvin and I have been really excited by how it's gone so far with our candidates kind of coming forward to talk about their plans and new plans for the city. Last week, Sean Donovan unveiled his vision for expanded healthcare access. And the week before that, Maya Wiley announced her plans for the care economy. And today, we are proud to welcome our next aspiring mayoral candidate, Kathryn Garcia. Kathryn, thanks for joining us. Now, even if you don't know a lot about her, I guarantee you know a lot about her work. She is a lifelong Brooklynite. She spent her career in crucial parts of government that make our city run smoothly. First, under Mayor Bloomberg, she led core operations at the Department of Environmental Protection, that low profile, but incredibly important agency that keeps our drinking water and sewers running. And after Superstorm Sandy, she led the effort and got clean water back to the Rockaways, where I used to live as a kid, in just 3 days, faster really than anybody had expected. As Mayor de Blasio's sanitation commissioner, she dug the city out of snowstorms, expanded the composting program, and delivered a major overhaul of the commercial carting industry. Known to be cool under fire, she became the administration's go-to crisis manager. As the head of Lead-Free NYC, she wrote and implemented the plan to end lead exposure for millions of kids. She served as NYCHA chair as the agency began to work to rehabilitate thousands of apartments under the new federal monitor. She built an emergency food program from scratch that delivered more than 130 million free meals to homebound seniors and medically fragile New Yorkers during the height of the pandemic. She is an experienced manager, and that's been a key piece of her pitch as a mayoral candidate, that she is the person who can manage New York City out of our current crisis. She's emphasized the need for comprehensive planning for climate change and for ramping up the creation of all types of housing. True to her brand, she's focused on nuts and bolts approaches to make life better, getting the trash bags off the sidewalk, speeding up the pace of construction, and switching city trucks from diesel to electric to cut air pollution. She has been a frequent attendee at our breakfasts, but this is the first time she is speaking to us. We are proud to have her here. Ladies and gentlemen, Kathryn Garcia. Kathryn, Zoom over to you.
Hello, and thank you for having me. And I want to thank Melva and Stephen for organizing this series, and thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. I know there are a lot of Zooms. After the year we've had, I am particularly cognizant of Abney's origins. Lou Rudin and Robert Tisch, in the middle of a crisis, recruiting business executives to become civic leaders and help bring New York back from the brink of fiscal collapse. Here we are, 50 years later, in a city where nearly 30,000 people have died from COVID and thousands of small businesses have closed. It should be obvious to everyone running for mayor, and I am sure it is obvious to everyone here, New York needs you again. I know I am the third mayoral candidate you've heard from, and you aren't even halfway done. This race is as crowded as the presidential primary, and it feels a little bit like a Veep episode. First, we had a mayor who thought he could be president, and now we have a presidential candidate who thinks he can be mayor. Other candidates are running for the title. I am running because I want to do the job. This is my first time seeking political office. I am not a politician. I am a public servant. There is a difference, and it makes all the difference. Politicians can make big promises, but to deliver, you need two things: the respect of your staff and the ability to navigate and cut through bureaucracy to get results. That's my specialty. Last year, I built a program over a weekend that has now delivered over 200 million meals to homebound seniors and vulnerable families, New Yorkers who would have otherwise gone hungry. At the same time, I showed up to work every day at 5 a.m. as sanitation commissioner, because that's when sanitation workers who pick up your trash and plow your snow get to work. I'm proud that every single union I've worked with or regulated has endorsed me. I was asked to protect children in NYCHA from lead exposure. Under my leadership, the number of children with elevated blood lead levels dropped by more than 20%. How? It was implementing new processes, speeding up the hiring for investigators, getting them trained with technology. It's not glamorous, but this is the kind of work that makes it possible to actually fix an elevator at NYCHA. And the difference between an elevator that works and one that doesn't, it can save someone's life when they're having a medical emergency on a top floor. That is why I do what I do. You can't govern New York City with tweets. You can't manage 335,000 city employees with a slogan. You don't learn government at a corporate retreat. And you can't show up to work 2 or 3 hours late or not at all. Being mayor is showing up to work early every day, treating New Yorkers like customers, and knowing that political platitudes don't solve problems. Hard work does. A real mayor knows to listen to the experts, follow the data, and make thoughtful decisions, especially when they are unpopular. Most important of all, as mayor, you can only make big changes if you are obsessed with the details. I am going to be a mayor who gets shit done for New Yorkers, period, because that's what separates the job of mayor from almost every other political office. My first priority is to bring New York City back to life. Unlike other major cities in the US, we have never depended on one industry or one factory. We are the city that never sleeps because of our neighborhood shops, our street artists and performers, the hole in the wall restaurant that has the best ramen and the only in my neighborhood small business. Small businesses employ more than half of New York City's private sector workforce. Of the more than 200,000 businesses located in New York City, 89% are very small businesses with fewer than 20 employees. They also create real economic opportunity, hiring local, giving immigrants a pathway to a first job. But the pandemic has taken a hard, harsh toll. Every few days, another restaurant that you could only find in New York closes forever. Gladys's in Crown Heights, to the Gotham Bar and Grill. A year ago, when I walked down my neighborhood block, I saw coffee shops, bars, laundromats. Today, all those storefronts are boarded up. That thing that makes New York hasn't gone away. The people who started those restaurants, theaters, salons, bodegas, dance clubs, gyms, and museums, all their creative talent is still here. They just need help. Today, I am announcing Reopen to Stay Open, my plan to jumpstart our city's local economy by making it easier for neighborhood businesses to turn to prosper. My Reopen to Stay Open plan has 3 focus areas: unlocking the potential of public space, killing the bureaucratic nonsense that makes it hard to be an entrepreneur, investing local to give small businesses the boost they need. New York City's strength lies in our ability to evolve. We saw this last year as restaurants pivoted to become pantries and restaurant suppliers pivoted to sell direct to consumer. The pandemic has taught us that we can move quickly. Restaurants created outdoor dining overnight, a process that would have taken months before this year. Lincoln Center just announced yesterday that it plans to create 10 outdoor performance and rehearsal spaces. We will build on that success by creating new, vibrant outdoor spaces to attract tourism and drive our recovery in every single neighborhood. My administration will reimagine how the city uses public space to give local businesses and art organizations a bigger footprint in their communities. We have the space to host thousands of pop-up dinners, theater performances, installations, and commercial markets. New York City parks alone cover an area the size of Boston. We will empower local restaurants, stores, artists, and theaters to take over hundreds of thousands of square feet of public space in parks and plazas to add seating, grow sales, and host shows and exhibitions. We'll get this done by reforming our concessions and public art permitting process. I envision a city filled with art and music, a city where you turn the corner and happen upon a violinist or a dance performance or a hip hop band. We will let restaurants and bars serve drinks outdoors in designated areas near their shops. Building on open streets, we will launch a small business block party series in every borough to bring theater and dance to more New Yorkers and put actors, dancers, and musicians back to work sooner. We will develop a partnership with streaming services to live stream on and off Broadway shows and other performance art. We can and should use the internet to bring New York theater into the homes of all New Yorkers for free. You can spend your entire life here and still discover new hidden gems every day. I know I do. We will focus the many existing marketing efforts on one clear message: rediscover NYC, encouraging New Yorkers to visit the beautiful parts of the city they have never been to. Everyone's heard of the Brooklyn Bridge. Rediscover NYC will promote lesser known neighborhood commercial corridors like Wyckoff Avenue in Ridgewood, Queens, where you can get Nepalese food or check out a hipster brewery. The city has lots of advertising space on our buildings, buses, subways, and airports. We will use it to promote Rediscover NYC and provide free advertising to local art, nonprofits, theaters, and other cultural organizations. In New York, space is always at a premium. Taken together, these changes will create a broader and bigger footprint for local businesses and artists to reopen, to stay open. Next, let's talk about eliminating bureaucratic nonsense. Today, to open a restaurant in New York, you need to get permits, file applications, undergo reviews, get inspections, and receive licenses from up to 8 different agencies before you can sell a bowl of soup. You have to go to each agency individually. Some require paper applications. Others have their own unique digital portals. None of them talk to each other. None of them make it easy to get your business up and running. New York City has over 6,000 rules and regulations and around 250 business-related licenses and permits. As if the high cost of doing business wasn't enough, the experience of navigating the city's bureaucracy to get and keep a permit is maddening. And when you have all your paperwork in order, your troubles are far from over. We have made a habit of motivating our city agencies to generate revenue through aggressive fee enforcement. This can cost small businesses citywide $50 million a year. To restart New York City's local economy, we have to change, and we have to change fast. I will create a single small business city permit. Any new business with less than 100 employees will be able to fill out one simple, streamlined permit to get up and running. You will be able to apply for that city permit on your smartphone. Any new or returning business that applies for a city permit will get a response within 1 month of submitting the application. During my first year, when new and returning businesses will need the most help, I will also give all local businesses a full year of fine and fee relief. Ultimately, you get what you measure. My metric for city agencies won't be how many fines did they issue. It will be how many new businesses did we help to get back open and keep open. It doesn't have to be this way. How am I going to get this done? I have no illusions about how hard it is to change bureaucracy. It is not glamorous. It is, in fact, incredibly tedious. It takes hours of sitting in rooms with commissioners and deputy commissioners who have a million reasons why it's impossible to change the way they work. I have spent years in those rooms, and I know how to knock heads together to get shit done. If I can move thousands of Department of Sanitation routes from paper, literally paper, to GPS, I can build the technology to get this done. And let me tell you, it's not easy to build a navigation system that literally does the opposite of any other GPS system in the world, to send you down every single possible street rather than the quickest way between point A and point B. The art and creativity in New York is what gives this city its soul. When I was at sanitation, one of my proudest moments was getting our staff into Vogue to highlight our program to recycle textile waste. But our art and cultural institutions need a break from bureaucracy too. We allocate $200 million towards capital projects at our art and cultural institutions each year. But it takes years before they see a penny because they have to go through multiple roadblocks, an alphabet city of agencies, OMB, MOX, the controller's office. They are forced to take out loans to front their expenses on capital projects that are fully funded by the city. Our nonprofits are literally spending money they don't have just to accept funding the city already promised them. As mayor, I will fix this madness. On my watch, city agencies will provide down payments on all city-funded art and cultural capital projects with the amount based on the scope and size. I will hold them accountable to reimburse art institutions and have them guarantee a portion of the reimbursement no matter what. Dealing with the city government is rarely a pleasure, but it definitely shouldn't feel like a punishment. This is not just a response to a pandemic. We need to eliminate bureaucracy no matter what. We can't continue this proliferation of rules and duplicative mayor's offices that don't get anything done. It's time for real leadership and management chops at City Hall. Finally, we need to talk about investment, both in our businesses and in our young people. Smaller local businesses have been the hardest hit, in part because they had the fewest resources to survive this pandemic. The Biden administration and Congress are poised to help, but for the long term, we need to invest local to get small businesses the capital they need to reopen and stay open. New Yorkers have already been stepping up, contributing to their favorite neighborhood stores on websites like GoFundMe. It's time for the city and for the city's business leaders to match their spirit and channel institutional dollars into one dedicated fund. I will launch Crowdsource NYC, a fund that provides zero interest microloans to small businesses with 20 employees or fewer, starting with an anchor investment from the city's pension fund and with the help of people in the private sector. The city already has a partnership with Kiva, a platform specializing in crowdfunding microloans. My administration would partner with the city's pension funds to invest at least $1 million, then ask the private sector to help us add an additional $4 million. With $5 million, the city would make a first investment in 5,000 local businesses who can then use our crowdsourcing platform to leverage up to $50 million from the public. After the first round of funding, and as loans are repaid, the city will reinvest its share of capital in Crowdsource NYC to continue investing in small businesses in need and support those local entrepreneurs. Every year, New York City's government spends billions of dollars on basic operations. My administration will make the city the biggest customer of local New York City businesses, temporarily shifting more of our spending to small purchases right here in New York to keep businesses afloat as tourism and office workers come back. I also want to create a pathway for CUNY students to become the next generation of New York City entrepreneurs. I will work with the private sector to ensure 10,000 paid internships for CUNY students. I want you to partner with the CUNY system to help drive curriculum requirements to make sure we're preparing our students for success, building off of existing programs like Women in Tech New York on Cornell's Roosevelt Island campus. When the next mayor comes to Abney, my hope is that those students will be in attendance. Without hesitation, I can tell you that my reopen to stay open agenda can and will get done in a Garcia administration. I believe in making promises I know I can keep. I will do what I do best, get up at 5 a.m. and not stop until I solve all the problems and eliminate all the roadblocks. We will need organizations like ABNY to do what they were made to do, to pitch in and help. Just as you stepped up to help make the census a success, this is another moment where civic leadership is needed. I can't do it alone. Every single one of you could sponsor a small business block party to support the neighborhoods you work and live in. You can hire CUNY students as interns and recruit the future of New York. But frankly, in this moment, I hope you'll do more. Small businesses need capital, and you can help by investing in Crowdsource NYC and pitching in on crowdsourcing campaigns for the places you know and love. If you share my faith in New York's economic future, you need to invest in these smaller local entrepreneurs who are taking a chance, but hope to one day be the next Lou Rudin or Jane Fraser. I hope you'll be executing this plan with me when I am your next mayor, but I'm also asking for your help as a lifelong New Yorker. I grew up in a multiracial household. I was one of three who was adopted in our family of 7. And my parents were able to support us on 2 civil servant salaries in 1970s Brooklyn. I was raised here and educated in our public schools, and it is wish was to raise my family. I'm not nostalgic for New York's past. The beauty of this city is that it keeps changing. Other places are boring. New York City is interesting. Every type of person you could possibly imagine is here. And each of us plays a role in making this city a fabulous place to live. I love the sound of opera filling a subway station. I love finding that hole-in-the-wall restaurant in Jackson Heights with the best empanadas ever. Those sounds and stores have been quiet for the last year, but they aren't gone. They are just waiting with the rest of New York for the heart of the city to start beating again. I want to bring New York back to life, and I know as mayor, I can get it done. If that's what you care about too, I hope you will support my campaign and check out my website at kgfornyc.com and get in touch with me and my team. Thank you again to Stephen and Melva for hosting me today, and I do look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. And I also just want to take a moment to thank you for acknowledging and recognizing the work that ABNY has done. You know, we are celebrating our 50th year serving the city of New York this year. And, you know, our founders, as well as our current members and board of directors really sort of invested their lives and livelihoods here in the city of New York. And we want to thank you for your offer to work with you, if you were to become the next mayor, to continue to reinvest, because, you know, we are diehard New Yorkers, and we will do anything and everything. And I think we have proven that over the years, over the 50th years, to keep New York City a great place to live, work, and visit. So thank you for that. So just to stay, let's stay with your reopen to stay open plan that you announced this morning with our membership. You talked about unlocking public space. You talked about sort of clearing out the bureaucratic red tape that clogs the wheels for businesses. You talked about investing locally, specifically for small businesses. And I think all 3 of those are very important things. But I'm really interested in understanding if you can talk a little bit about how your plan is different than the policies and programs that we've seen in recent months as we try to deal with COVID-19, like the open streets, like open storefronts, like open culture. You know, as we work to create a more diverse city, we found that those programs don't often appeal in all the neighborhoods, and there are community groups who would love to participate, but they might not be designated, and you talked a little bit about that. So could you expand on how you envision this to be a bit more diverse and inclusive of the entire city of New York?
No, absolutely. We've seen this is really doubling down on what we have seen start to work in certain neighborhoods, but it is definitely not everywhere, and it needs to be everywhere. And that is why we will go into the neighborhoods that particularly have smaller arts groups and make those linkages so that they understand that there are opportunities for them to be out performing in our public spaces. And I want to go big. I think that this is a real opportunity for us to reimagine the public realm and do pop-ups, close down portions of streets, give them that time to really do exciting things. I always view the way that, Broadway is sort of the crown jewel of where performance happens, but it is all of the young people who come to the city and who live in the city who are taking part in smaller arts organizations, more experimental, before they make it to the bright lights of Broadway. We need the feeder system to be really strong and thriving.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I think, we've seen a lot of creative and innovative solutions in communities that historically have not been able to participate in in a lot of those activities. So reaching out to those and exposing all the arts and culture and creativity we have in New York is really, really important. Just staying with your reopen to stay open for a minute, I want to talk a little bit about your investment into small businesses, right? And how you would pay for it. So you talked about sort of some seed funding from the pension plan, but then you also talked about partnering with the private sector to make an investment. Can you tell me on day one of your administration, how would you reach out to the private sector to start cultivating these relationships and talk about these plans so that we can get buy-in from all New Yorkers, but particularly the ones you're looking to fund this investment in small businesses?
So, first thing before day one, when I went in November, we'll be having those conversations. Hopefully not on Zoom. That would be my goal. But we will be having those conversations, and some of them will be with organizations like ABNY, and some of them will be direct. But it is really a call to arms. I believe that there are New Yorkers of all stripes who want to make sure that our home is strong and are willing to come to the table. And I have heard it on the campaign trail. We want to be part of the solution. We want to ensure that New York City grows, and we want to enjoy it again. So I believe that these are actually really pretty easy conversations to have, because I've seen an enormous amount of enthusiasm as I have been out on the campaign trail.
So keeping with sort of the recovery theme for a bit, crisis and recovery is something that you are familiar with and have dealt with largely, for instance, the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, as well as sort of the height of COVID-19 pandemic. And when we look to recover from the time that we're in, what do you see as some of the key areas outside of your reopen to stay open plan to get New York City fully back up and running again?
So the first priority, and I hope it doesn't have to be my first job, is we have to have COVID under control. And so I am hopeful that the vaccine will have been given to everyone, but obviously there have been some stumbles along the way about ensuring that it was equitably distributed and our most vulnerable were getting it, which is why I put out a vax plan and actually said, please copy and paste. If we are there and we are able to really begin to fully reopen our economy, we know that this city will not come back if we also aren't focused on our fundamental city services. That if we do slash and burn cuts and people don't feel safe and people feel like things are dirty, that they can't get around on mass transit, and that their kids aren't really fully back in school, we won't come back. Those are the foundation stones that allow us to grow and really be able to ensure that the city is going in the right direction. And then on my first day, I want to be starting to put together those aspects of my plan and actualizing them around our long-term needs and climate change, because it's not going away because there's a pandemic. It didn't stop. And we saw this year, it is here. California burned, Texas froze. And New York City had a tropical storm that took down trees in Queens and no one had power for a week. It's already here. We've got to protect the city from its impacts.
Yeah, so it sounds like you agree that climate change is a way out of this crisis. Thank you for that. And resiliency strategies, we found for many communities across the city have really been on top of mind, have been a top of mind issue as we continue to see the effects of climate change, like you just talked about. You've prioritized the creation of a fully renewable energy economy as a part of these resiliency strategies. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do we make sure that climate change is something that continues to be the focus of all communities as we work to be more inclusive and more equitable and more sustainable?
Well, we have to also talk about the benefits of when you are doing some of the projects that we need to do around climate. It is not only about protecting the earth, it is often about protecting our public health. So when I was at DEP and banned number 6 fuel oil, the dirtiest fuel oil that's out there, you could see the difference in air quality on maps that were created. You could actually see, which meant that we were also reducing childhood asthma. When you envision a city that is more sustainable, you are also envisioning a city where its people will be healthier. Uh, and we know that we need to decarbonize the economy. We need to ditch diesel. So I've said I will electrify 10,000 school buses. Those are our youngest lungs that need to be protected. Uh, we have to make sure that we are greening. When you talk about putting in rain gardens and more tree cover to deal with the fact that we have an urban heat island effect, well, that means when you're walking down the street, you're cooler. What that means is that the air is actually cleaner that you breathe. And so when we focus on climate, we're also focusing on our environment and what keeps us healthier. But we do need protection. We need to be building things in a way that ensures that we're dealing with heat, we're dealing with flooding, we're dealing with storm surge, because we can't only plan for the last emergency. We need to be planning for all of them going forward.
Yeah, and just a minute ago, you talked about sort of those fundamental city services, and when you talk about sort of all the opportunities that being resilient and climate change, smart climate change policies can create, we think about sort of living healthy, especially for those communities that have been disproportionately affected by things like asthma rates and COVID-19 pandemic. When we think about reinvesting in housing, right, and in NYCHA and the conditions that people live in NYCHA, how sort of these resiliency methods can be extremely helpful. So just really sticking with housing for a minute, you talked about fundamental city services on day one to keep it, to make sure that we recover and keep the city going. And you've made a priority to address the issue of homelessness and housing affordability. And you talked about planning to focus city investment to create 50,000 units of deeply affordable housing. You talked about building 10,000 units of supportive housing to provide permanent shelter, services and support for people living in these conditions, particularly the homelessness effect. Aside from the creation of housing units, what else do you think needs to be done to tackle the issues of homelessness and affordability in the city of New York?
So besides building, which is always critical, we need to ensure that we're building all the time. We've been in a housing shortage since before I was born. And so we actually do need housing across many different income levels. But beyond that, we make Band-Aid solutions. The amount of money, like honestly, the amount of money that we spend on sheltering people, we could literally give them all a down payment for an apartment. It's like we are not spending our money wisely. And so even when you talk about how much money we give folks to go and rent an apartment, the voucher. I don't know when they made this dollar figure, but I don't think you could rent an apartment for that amount of money since about 1965. We need to make it come closer to the market so that people are moving into apartments faster. We know that housing heals. It allows you to be successful in education. It allows you to be successful in employment. And we need to make sure that people are in permanent homes. This is how we really grow the city. It's the right thing to do. And it is spending money wisely rather than more or less just dumping it in the sea.
So what do you think are some of the things, I mean, especially the issue of homelessness, but you're absolutely right, sort of maintaining affordability in the city has, been increasingly a challenge for the city for so many decades. But what do you see differently? You talked about sort of managing money differently. What do you think you would do differently than what's happening now to provide more housing, particularly around the management of funding?
Certainly. So like we absolutely need to be moving people very quickly into permanent apartments, much more quickly than we do now. So that we are not making shelter a solution, we are making homes a solution. And I believe that that can be done. We stumble over ourselves in the bureaucratic process, but I believe that you can get people, particularly families, out of shelter and into an apartment within a month. It's about what it takes you in the private sector to find a house and move into it. I believe it can be done. Secondly, with people who are single adult homeless and street homeless, I do believe there are opportunities to do hotel conversions into supportive housing so that those are real shelters, not real homes for them in the long run, so they can get back on their feet, deal with a mental health issue, deal with a substance abuse issue, and begin to talk about how they're going to get back into employment. I think that is the right direction to go in rather than keep talking about shelters. We know that that works, but we also need to ensure that we have safe haven beds and we build trust so that people will come inside. This is what we have known for decades now, that supportive housing is the answer. We need to actually just do the solution we already know.
So going back to open streets for a minute, I've heard you talk about sort of New York City needs to envision new streetscape with electric vehicles and open streets and more accessible public transportation in order to create an easier commute for all New Yorkers, as well as sort of shrink the city's carbon imprint on the environment. Back to your sustainability plan. Why do you think these issues are so important to address in keeping New York a thriving city, especially in this moment of time, recovering from this health pandemic that we're in?
So I fundamentally believe that COVID has given us an opportunity to rethink our public realm, and that we need to make New York City what it should have been all along, really putting the public in the public realm and talking about how we could balance all of these uses and actually implement them. I think that makes New York City special. We have to differentiate ourselves from Ohio or, from LA. We are a pedestrian city, and we need to double down on the fact that we are a pedestrian city so that you can bike and take the bus and walk and have those interactions that we have on the street. You do bump into people you haven't seen in a year when you're wandering around the streets of New York. That doesn't happen everywhere. And also, this is an opportunity to ensure that we're doing it in a sustainable way. We can connect city bikes to buses, to trains, to have like a one swipe on your commute. And that might be multimodal. We're depending on where you live. So I actually see that this is where COVID has opened our eyes to even more possibilities and allowed us to see what are the real things about New York that make us special.
And yeah, and in recent, history in the city, in transportation policy, in the city working to expand public transportation options across the 5 boroughs have been somewhat difficult in especially those communities that have experienced sort of a disparity in public transportation options, right? We have a large number of New Yorkers who live in two-fare zones, and fighting to make public transportation more accessible has been a struggle, particularly for this administration. The community outreach efforts have been difficult. How would you propose working with communities to come up with strategies that work for individual communities, recognizing that the geography and the typography of the city is very different in very different places?
Yes, no, I've spent a lot of time in some of those geographies that are very different. It's like, oh my goodness, this street is not nearly wide enough to be two-way. How does a plow get down the street? It's like, this doesn't make sense. Or who made this road that's literally curve after curve and hilly? There are places that are actually very hilly in the city of New York. But this is where you bring together those key community leaders and across different communities, because particularly when you're talking about transportation, it's a network. It needs to knit the city together. And there are areas of the city that really need us to double down, I believe, particularly on buses, because it's the fastest way to go. And so more select bus service. I love the technology that started to roll out that turns lights green when the bus is coming so that it can keep going. If you make it fast enough, people will use it and get out of their cars. I fundamentally believe that. People take the subway because it's actually faster than driving in many cases. If it's not faster, they choose their car. But when it's faster, that is what they choose to take. But we know that there are also areas of the city where you can't not drive to a grocery store. And so that is why I've said we need to have an incentive for people to install electric chargers and use electric cars, use electric vehicles, because that will make our air cleaner, that will support the environment, and it will deal with the fact that sometimes you can't take a bus to the grocery store. It's just not feasible. But we can make commuting much more efficient using buses, and also begin to plan for longer term infrastructure to those areas of the city that are two-fare zones and transportation deserts.
Thank you. So you talked a lot about, you mentioned a number of different plans that you propose in your campaign. And, paying for it is always something we're very interested in, right? How do you propose to pay for it? And according to the mayor, there's about a $1.5 billion revenue decline due to COVID driven activities. Particularly, a $2.5 billion decline in property tax revenue, and approximately $5.9 billion in unexpected costs since the pandemic. How do you propose to pay for these plans and these proposals?
So first and foremost, if we don't get our economy back open, it will not be affordable. You have to get the economy moving again. And that will generate tax revenue that we've been losing across the board. So it's like, we're going to bend that curve in order to come back. The second thing is making smart choices. What are we spending money on? There are a tremendous number of redundancies, as I mentioned, in government. There's a mayor's office of cybersecurity, and a mayor's office of data analytics, and a mayor's office of technology, and there's a commissioner. We can make ourselves more efficient. I know that we've added $50 million in overhead at Tweed at DOE Central alone. That is money better spent elsewhere. This is how I view it. But, we should be doing the practical things. We should be paying down our debt in a nearly 0% interest rate environment. You want to refinance, just like if you're a homeowner. And we need to be continuing to look at how we grow our economy. Those are the fundamental ways that you come back. But I am also about sitting down with labor and talking tough about productivity, about how we do that. When I was at DEP, we cut $100 million out of the operating budget, 10%, without a layoff. I know it can be done.
Thank you. And just talking about sort of the property tax revenue, we here at ABNY, like I mentioned before, are diehard New Yorkers, like many New Yorkers, right? And we couldn't imagine living any place else other than this city. But talking about, again, sort of decline in property tax revenue specifically and people leaving New York, what would you say to those New Yorkers who are either talking about New York, leaving New York, or continuing the narrative that people are escaping and fleeing the city that we love? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say for those people who left in the 70s and didn't buy a brownstone on the Upper West Side, you made a fundamental financial mistake. Definitely never count us out, because we have always come back. And we will come back stronger, and you will find out that you will want to be here again, just in the same way you wanted to be here before, because it is the most interesting place to live in the world. It is the place where you can be a food snob in your own neighborhood because it's going to have the best restaurants. It is where you can do absolutely anything you want to do and know that you're the best at it, that we are hyper competitive. And if you are the best in your industry, you are probably in New York City.
Nice. So now we're going to open it up to some questions from our members. You talked about earlier not being a politician, but a public servant. And here's a question from one of our members. As sanitation commissioner, you were up at 5 a.m. making sure that the trash was being collected and New Yorkers had clean water. While this might not be the most glamorous part of the New York City, but it's vital, right? How do you think your experience as commissioner has shaped and prepared you for this role as mayor?
So I fundamentally understand how the city works and runs in a way that no other candidate today knows. So I know where the trip hazards are already, and I know how to make things better. But I also had the opportunity of serving, 8.6 million people, and making New York City happy all at the same time is often very hard. So I know that they are very vocal when they do not feel they are getting their money's worth, and have no problem saying it. I have had that experience on the front lines. So my experience is, I understand that the mayor's office is not just parades and balloons. It is mainly about getting really hard work done. And you need to be prepared for that in this climate on day one.
Thank you. This next question is about tourism. And you talked a little bit about this in sort of your reopen to stay open and making the streets of the city of New York lively again. But this is from one of our board members, Jeff Stewart. And actually, there's been a couple of questions around tourism. And, we know what tourism contributes to our economy, right? And what makes New York City what it is. And in the middle of the pandemic, we've lost, millions of tourists. Looking into the future, what do you think that needs to be done to attract more visitors, again, outside of opening up the streets and making more lively, like you talked about in your reopening plan? In the meantime, how do we encourage New Yorkers to stay in their own city and, patronize and visit those small streets that you talked about, those hidden gems that we haven't discovered before?
Oh no, we're going to need to do a little bit of advertising right now. On Rediscover NYC, it's about New Yorkers being tourists in their own city, really thinking about the city as a place to explore. And that rolls out from there to the region, the nation, and then obviously eventually international. But today, museums are open. I bet most New Yorkers don't know museums are open. They think everything in New York is closed. And if you're outside of New York City, you think everything is locked down. You think we don't go outside, which is not an attractive message to get people to come here. So I believe that we need to be talking about reopening and being open, as well as You don't even know the New York City yet. Have you been to here? I actually, very fun. I was out in the Rockaways with somebody who had never been to the Rockaways, with a staff member. And she's like, wow, I had no idea this was out here. She starts looking on Zillow for like her summer beach, like her new beach escape is not going to be to go south or to go out to the Hamptons. She's like, this is amazing. I was like, yeah, you didn't know that this was here? And she's like, I had no idea.
Yeah, we, worked for the Queensborough President's Office for many years, and we call the Rockaways Hamptons West. So yes, I'm glad that folks are starting to discover what we've always known as a gem, and our chairman, Stephen Rubenstein, has a lot of experience out there as well. So just to wrap it up, I'm sorry?
I said it was funny. I was like,
just two last questions. Again, we've had a couple of members sort of ask about public safety, and each of the candidates that have come before us, we've asked a question about sort of the candidate's idea about making sure that New York City is a safe place for everyone who lives here. Over the past year, there has really been the strong call for police reform, right? And we know public safety, that police reform is just a piece of public safety. But specifically, we've heard you say that you believe reform is important, but what is needed is a better way to manage the culture and chain of command discipline. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's often this call when PD, when really terrible things happen, and we put another oversight in. But if you think about PD today, there are 5 district attorneys who have oversight. There are 2 U.S. attorneys that have oversight. There is the AG who has oversight, and there's the CCRB that has oversight. You know what that actually ends up somewhat does is that your chain of command within PD is almost outsourced discipline, so that you're not actually having them held accountable for how they do discipline of the ranks and how they message what is important through the ranks. So this is a lot about management. You get what you measure. Are you only measuring whether or not someone got arrests? Are you only measuring that in promoting people off those numbers? How are you measuring community engagement? How are you measuring trust? How are you promoting? Who are you promoting in the agency? Are you getting discipline done in a timely fashion? Are you transparent about it? As sanitation commissioner, I did discipline all the time. You're late, basically I docked you a day's pay. You threw away and took a bribe for taking some garbage from a private establishment, you got fired. Clear discipline does very much help. But I've also said we need to make it so that our police officers are older, that they start at 25, and that new recruits live in the city, which I know requires state legislation, but I think is important, because I want PD and communities to really be working together to ensure that crime is going down. There are some concerning spikes in crime, and we need to make it so that we are driving that down in partnership with community. But I also have said I thought we needed to embed mental health professionals when they are getting called to someone who's in emotional distress. We know that that would be more successful than what we're asking them to do now. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think we can have safety and respect for all of our communities.
Thank you. And for my final question, and I'm sure you hear about this a lot, in its viral TikTok, you were deemed as a mayoral candidate with the best bagel. The best bagel order with open face everything, bagel with cream cheese, a slice of tomatoes, capers, lox, and onion. You are a real New Yorker, I tell you. But what's interesting about the platform that was used to sort of promote this. And how do you think a platform like TikTok might benefit you in reaching young voters? And do you have a plan to engage young voters in your campaign?
and I learned how to use Clubhouse the other day. So I actually think that you need to make sure that you are reaching voters where they are. And if that means you have to get savvy about TikTok or savvy about Twitter or savvy about Clubhouse, then that is where you need to be able to talk to them. I know that these are not the typical things that were used in the past. It was all mail and TV ads, but there's so many new platforms that also you can have a little fun with, that can be a little bit more show off your personality. I also don't understand how some people order those bagel orders. I was like, I'm not going to say anything. I just don't understand it. And you know, I view that also as a treat. Bagels are treats. So, but I think that these are opportunities to have the public, have young people get to know you in a different way than traditional media might allow. So it's sort of fun. It's sort of the new pieces of the campaign can be sort of exciting.
Yeah, and I think if we were in person, if this was an in-person event, we probably would have had that bagel for everyone. Like if we were at a hotel and we were hosting you, I think we would have done that for you.
Would have made sure you had my ingredients.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm actually going to give the last word to Stephen if he wants to say a few words to wrap us up.
Kathryn, I want to say thank you. Melva, love you. Thank you. I just want to say, Kathryn, I love your slogan, get shit done. That is as good a slogan as anybody has thrown out yet. And is important and not just a slogan. So I also want to thank you for not mixing capers with a cinnamon raisin bagel.
Oh my God.
I see the wincing on Carl's face right there with that. So, but anyway, we wish you the best. We want to say thank you. This has been our pleasure to get to know you better, and best of luck.
Yes. Thank you. It was great to be here. Thank you, Melva. Thank you, Stephen. Really appreciate it.